Good morning, everyone. We are here today. Thank you for attending our webinar. I am Jessica Touchard, and I am with the Senior Recruiter with GeoSearch. I'm here with Richard Serby, the President of GeoSearch. And today's webinar, we were going to talk about communication strategies in the workplace. This was a webinar suggested to us by our attendees in the past. So if you could type in the chat box, that's a great way for us to communicate today with you and let us know where you're sitting. If you're in Colorado Springs, that's where we are, and we'll see where others come from. Your mics are muted, so the chat box is the way to communicate with us if you'd like to join in the conversation. And then we will also have a couple of polls as we go through the webinar today. I'm not getting anything through the chat box. Are you, Rich? Not sure if it's working.
No.
You may need to maybe try the Q&A if some of you are trying to put in the chat box, it's not coming through. But if you could let us know where you're located today, and just so we can kind of test out the technology here and make sure that everyone is connected. I don't know if it's working. We usually get people right away. Oh, we do have one that said Colorado Springs in the Q&A. So maybe the Q&A box is the best to use today, I guess. Now I see somebody in Washington, D.C. And that, it's a pretty small group today. Minneapolis, hello. Okay, good. So the Q&A box, I guess. Thank you for your patience there. And Rich, you want to begin?
Sure. What we're going to be doing today in terms of our agenda is talking about various types of communication, how to improve communication personally, professionally, within the workplace. And then, of course, we can't ignore what we've experienced over the last decade or more with regard to the onset of electronic communications. And so we'll have a lot of time spent on that aspect. And okay, if you could respond to this poll, we'd appreciate it.
Let's see if I can see anybody. We're having a little bit of, okay, so 83% today, Rich, are senior level that are with us today.
Okay.
Got a few mid-level, so very few entry level and students today.
Okay.
Mostly senior and mid-career.
Very good. Well, we're glad that you're here, and we can move on to our first topic. Okay, what I'd like to do for my part of this is to cover what we would normally cover, what we would consider to be the traditional communication topics. Interpersonal verbal communication, and that, of course, is the ability to be effective in how you work with people, communicate with people one-on-one, and developing those skills. Nonverbal communication, which is to be alert to facial expressions and body language that will also communicate whether a person is with you on a topic that perhaps you are speaking to, or if you have lost them, if they're giving you nonverbal cues and signals that they are either with you or not with you in what you are trying to communicate. Public speaking, which is the ability to develop the skills to stand in front of an audience whether that's a small group of 3, 4, 5, 6 people, or whether that is a larger group of 105 people. But the skills of public speaking can be developed. These are not things that we're born with. We are not born with the ability to speak in front of large groups, but we can develop the skills in order to be able to do that effectively. And those of you who are in senior positions, leadership positions, already understand this, because that is likely a part of your responsibilities when you attend staff meetings, when you attend conferences and trade shows. You probably are expected to be able to stand in front of a group of people and speak effectively. Small group communications, which are very common in the workplace, and that is the ability to participate in a group that typically will have some kind of a goal in mind. That goal might be to make some decisions with regard to the purchase of new software and whether or not that purchase is a wise decision or not. That could be some other kind of operations meeting with regard to how you are working with a particular client and the steps that you need to take in order for the project to stay on time and on budget. Written communications, having the ability to write in an effective manner, whether that's in a letter, an email, or other form of written communication. It's a very good way to make sure that the receiver of the communication has everything in front of them that they need to understand about what you are trying to communicate, what you are trying to explain. And then listening skills. Perhaps the most important skill of all is the ability to listen and respond, letting that person know that's trying to speak to you or present to you, letting that person know that you do hear and understand what they are trying to communicate. So listening is a very important skill to develop. So how do you improve these skills? You can take advantage of communication opportunities, such as going to a community college or a university class and participate in formal communication skills instruction. Be involved in political or civic service groups, whatever is of interest to you and whatever would make sense for you to participate, so you have an opportunity to express yourself in verbal form and express yourself in written form. Community, political, or civic service groups. Again, those of you who are at the mid and senior level do have opportunities to participate, whether or not it's related to your business, but to participate in groups in your own community where you would have the ability and opportunity to communicate to a group of people. Making yourself available to speak to civic groups in schools. You have knowledge, you have skills, you have experience that is valuable. And those civic groups, whether that's your local Rotary Club or whether that is a high school, a middle school, or a college, they would welcome a chance to invite you in to talk about subjects on which you are an expert and they are interested in learning more. Take advantage of those opportunities. Volunteer to present technical or other topics at your place of work. Again, we're talking to mid-level people and senior level people, and this is very likely a part of your day-to-day experience already. Form a brown bag lunch discussion group at your place of work. That would be a more informal way to especially if you're trying to work with junior level technical staff and you want to be able to create a team environment. A good way to do that is to make the meeting less formal, have a meeting over lunch, and discuss the topics of importance. And of course, be a participant in meetings, not just a listener. But again, once again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because if you are mid-level and senior level, you are already a participant in meetings. You're not just sitting there listening. Now, I'll hand this over to Jessica.
Thank you. So I wanted to make sure that we included in this webinar a little bit about electronic communication because it's inevitable in our business today. It's probably one of the ways we communicate the most throughout the day in this date and time. And sometimes getting the most out of electronic communication can seem more time consuming or distracting than just walking down the hall and talking to somebody. And some of the things I wanted to talk about today are obviously some pitfalls that we all have experienced within electronic communication, but just to kind of keep in mind those pitfalls in order to avoid them, basically. And then also, we've done a little bit of research. It's a very high level of research on some tools that may get you out of your inbox and allow you to collaborate and communicate a little bit more effectively in an electronic form. So some of the problems that we have with electronic communication, we've all been buried in email. First thing we come in, we get our coffee and we are sitting there in email for the next, if we allow it to, it can be 2 or 3 hours, just responding to email, just reading all of those things. So an idea and things can get lost in that kind of unorganized communication form. I'm thrilled that there are things, happening within our email programs these days that allow us to, I've got a focused and an other box now within Outlook, and it does help. It helps a lot in terms of making sure that you're seeing the most important electronic communications first. It helps a lot with organized, but still, I'm sure we all can relate to the frustration of getting caught in those forms. In those forums and talking with those things. And with email, we are sending messages that are sent immediately. Sometimes we leave out important, communication, and we have no insight as to what the reaction is on the other side of the desk or world or wherever you are emailing to. So that is another pitfall of email communication, is we need to be very concise and informed when we're sending those things. And it's becoming such a habit to our everyday life that sometimes people and evidence of the conversation that we're trying to say are getting left out. Also, I'm sure you've noticed within the workplace, whether you are a manager or an employee, that people tend to feel more emboldened in these types of communications or compelled to say things that they would not normally say in person. That's another issue that some offices are running into with electronic communication of all kinds. And then, of course, it's intrusive. We're getting emails when we are at dinner. We're getting emails when we are sitting in meetings. So anywhere, anytime, these things can interrupt our day, and they can interrupt our train of thought and actually hinder the actual work that we need to get done. So some of the solutions that we were looking at were ways to communicate with teams that may not be necessarily able to be around a table for a brown bag lunch, for instance, because they're in different states or different offices. And we found that some of the solutions, these live chat solutions that are available now, I'm using Slack as an example, but there's other similar apps. They actually offer almost a round table group chat and one-on-one chat, actually, for team meetings. So you can do it via audio, you can do video conferencing, or it can just be a chat session if it's something where you are doing that maybe on the side as you're working on a project or a project plan or something like that. These systems allow you to kind of save files, sync files, archive files, and then you can search for them. Looks like you can share some screens. I've never actually used that function of Slack, but you can share screens and edit each other's work. So if you're working on a presentation or something like that, these can be really efficient and collaborative tools that allow you to kind of get immediate feedback with the participants in the meeting. And I would say these are typically internal, but maybe some of you use these with clients and such as well. And then I've just listed some similar apps that were listed alongside this, but I think in general, just these live chat tools can be very helpful. And then we've got some project management or task related tools, and these are basically bulletin boards, and is the way I think of them, or a digital note board. Trello is the one that I decided to highlight, but there's a lot of these types of apps as well. But basically somewhere you can go in, create, whether it's a PowerPoint or a presentation or a budget or whatever you're doing, and leave it there for others to view, for others to edit, and to collaborate on. We use this, I've got an assistant here, and we use this for task lists. We can kind of drag, once something has been done, we can drag it to the next phase, and that way we can keep in communication as to what's been done and where we are in different projects, and doing that in a way that it is on our own timeline. So we don't need to all be sitting down at our computer at the same moment in order to keep in touch that way. And then, of course, virtual meeting tools. We're using one right now, GoToMeeting. And I'm sure a lot of you use these in your meetings. And I was kind of curious to get some feedback from all of you as to what you find works best. We are, as recruiters, seeing this a lot within the interview space. Many interviews now are done on Skype. Many sales calls I do are done on Skype, whether it's via phone or video kind of meetings. And I think it's really useful for things like, 3 or 4 of us needing to have a conversation about the plan going forward, or different kinds of meetings like that. So this is definitely part of my everyday workflow, and I'm sure a lot of you are using this, but if not, an excellent way to keep in touch with people that are in the field, people that are outside of the office and needing to be in meetings. So I wanted to get just a little information on what you are using, what types of electronic technology outside of email. I know we're all using that, but basically what is the most popular in your day? What do you like the best? And we'd love to see your not only your poll answer, but your comments in the question box as well. And I think you can select any and all that you use. I see 100% of you are using GoToMeeting. Correct, because we're all on here. But yeah, I'm glad to see a lot of you, it looks like, are also using chat applications and, other types of things. And I gotta figure out how to use my communication here in terms of where we are seeing the answers to that. And then just a small percentage of you are using the Trello or the collaborative workspaces, and that may have to do with your nature of your work. But also I encourage you to check out some of these. Trello is the only one that I've used consistently, but I have looked at some of these other ones in terms of making a to-do list and sharing that with a team, project team or something like that. Really helpful. So Chelsea Bonini was going to be here today to talk about a little bit about what we can all do to advance our communication skills, but she got called into jury duty, so she's got some listening skills that she's practicing today. But basically, as we all progress in our careers, we want to just make sure that we're making communication a priority, that we're practicing these things. This is not a comfortable venue for me yet, and Rich has done public speaking his whole life, and it's still not a very comfortable place for me to be when I need to be, when I'm called to do so. But I know that if I do these things and I practice, that it'll, the easier it will become. So I think that that is a really important thing for all of us to remember, whether you struggle with interpersonal communication, maybe one-on-one, to make sure you're practicing that, or if you just struggle with speaking to large audiences. It's a great way to improve. It's just a practice, of course. So how do you get practice? I think setting some daily or weekly goals, if this is something you'd really like to improve, and to go out of your way to put yourself in a position to communicate in ways that sometimes make you uncomfortable. For some people, public speaking is just as natural as can be, but you put them one-on-one in a group or with one person and take away that group dynamic and they feel very uncomfortable. So make sure you're knowing yourself and understand where you need to practice.
It would be a challenge because we know how we are with our devices. It seems as if we are trapped, and we feel very uncomfortable if we don't have our smartphone with us at all times. We feel uncomfortable if we're not sitting in front of our laptop doing Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. All of those things are communication inhibitors as well as opportunities to communicate. So taking yourself out of that comfort zone and making yourself available in such as community and school kinds of environments where you are in, where your intention is to communicate verbally in person in either a small group setting or in a public speaking setting, whatever that might be. That is the kind of practice that most of us need. We don't really need more practice with our smartphone.
No. Well, and that's, my second point here, just make sure you're understood. Be concise and clarify as best as you can during conversations, especially in the case of written communication through text and email. I can't tell you how many times I and others have miscommunicated within email throughout our careers, and I'm sure you all can point to some times that that's happened in your experience as well. But just to remind ourselves that just because written communication is so fast and furious these days, it still needs to be just that, communication. Develop your listening skills. The best communicators are almost always the best listeners, as Rich pointed out earlier. And I think it's really important to remind ourselves to listen without judgment, without distraction, and without thinking about what we're going to say next. And then really respond to the person that you're talking to rather than just reacting to maybe the subject matter at hand. And I think that is one of the best skills that people can develop. And then, of course, maintain eye contact when you're within an interpersonal communication situation, whether it's in a small group or large. Basically, that builds trust. It builds credibility. It shows that you're interested and that you're actually talking to the person in front of you. And it invites questions and opinions. And feedback's always a good thing, especially within a collaborative communication environment. So in terms of 2019, that was kind of the task we were given by people who have been attending these webinars, is they really wanted to know, what can we do to improve communication throughout the workplace and throughout in our own lives in 2019. So of course, new year, new you. And it's a chance to reevaluate your current goals. What do you want to improve? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? How can you challenge yourself? All of these things are always something to consider this time of year. Organization is key, meaning that staying organized the best you can and track your successes and failures. As you go through certain things in your career, you'll really see where you shine and where you can improve. Find other coworkers who are interested in learning the same types of things and partner with them and aid them and yourself in that success. And then lastly, of course, believe in yourself and set your mind to it and you can achieve it. That's Chelsea's note. I think it's really, I think it's really an interesting topic. And knowing that this is just a part of our workplace every single day, whether it's interpersonal or written cell phone texts or chat boxes, we are just doing this at all times every day. So if any of you have any questions or comments in terms of how you see communication breaking down or how you see some real success stories happening within your organization, we would love to discuss those here today too.
And since all of you are mid to senior level people, we may have questions for you.
That's right. That's right. I do see now that I'm in the right box that both Skype for business and regular Skype is used quite a bit as I'm looking at these comments. Tim is asking, what do you think is the best form of communication? I don't know if there's a best form, but I think listening and understanding what the needs are always very important.
I think it's a combination of there was an old-fashioned way, and I'm one of those old-fashioned guys, that there were no other ways to communicate other than in person, in small groups, in a public speaking setting. Those were the options. And then we moved into the electronic communications, and I had to be taken along kicking and screaming into the electronic age, but understood fully that I needed to understand it. I needed to know how to use it effectively. And so I did learn it. But I think if that's an example, if you are one of those people who are very uncomfortable in a personal communication setting, a public speaking setting, a small group setting, then your challenge is just the opposite of mine. Your challenge is to become skilled and make yourself available for those opportunities. And then I can learn something from you with regard to electronic communications.
I also think communication does not have to be seamless or perfect. I think many people get caught up in the public speaking realm, especially with the image that communication needs to be polished, like we see on TV and the news every day. Really, it needs to be a way for you to get your knowledge across to the audience that you're speaking to. So anything that does that is effective. And knowing that you are an expert in your field and somebody has asked you to come speak about it, you are being able to get that communication across effectively is really all that matters.
Do we have any other questions?
Well, I think one of them was cell phones in the workplace. Somebody had mentioned earlier in the conversation. And I believe those have definitely blurred the lines between our personal and our workplace communications. We're communicating with our family and work in all kinds of venues. We're doing work at dinner tables, and we're doing, coordinating daycare in the middle of a meeting. So how do these things affect our everyday life, do you think?
Well, in my opinion, I'm guilty of all of those things. I am guilty of reading my messages while I'm with other people at a dining table. And I've had to train myself, just leave the phone at home, go enjoy the dinner. The world will be okay for the couple of hours that you will not have your phone.
So the next one is, how would you suggest helping people, staff, move from electronic communication to more face-to-face communication?
How to train the staff.
Sometimes the staff assumes that if there needs to be face-to-face communication, they're in trouble. That's so true. When the boss walks into your office and you're like, what are you doing here?
Well, sometimes there's not an opportunity to have face-to-face communication just because of the way that we work now. We are scattered. We are working on tasks that are electronic communications, and that's a part of the task. So in order to change that dynamic, in order to make more personal communications possible, you really have to make a concerted effort to do that. And the more you do it, of course, the more comfortable your staff will be with regard to having a meeting around a conference table rather than having a meeting on an electronic platform device when we are seated 30 feet away from one another. So it's something that has to be done purposely, and with the idea that not only are we going to communicate about this project, we're going to do it in such a way that we can make our staff more comfortable doing it face to face.
Yeah, I have stories from my husband where he was saying there was one company he worked for where the executive level people would really only come down the hall. It was about once a quarter, and it was like this big, almost like a parade. And they would come down the hall thinking this is their face-to-face communication with their staff. And, it made everybody nervous. Everybody kind of dressed up that day, knowing it was coming, that kind of thing. It's not true communication. However, there were other people, obviously, in senior management and people he was working with collaboratively that walked into his office every day. And in those cases, it was not intimidating. It was more effective in terms of their relationship and understanding of what they were trying to get accomplished and so forth. So I think that is, I think consistency is the key there, in my opinion. If it's rare, it's going to feel rare, and it's going to feel awkward when it happens.
I would call that intimidation rather than communication.
I don't think it was meant to
have a parade.
It was actually meant to be like, hey, we just want to say hello kind of thing, but it was really
just one of the guys.
Yeah. It was weird. It was weird. So anyway, any other questions or comments? Ralph suggests we put the phones face down on the dinner table. Absolutely. If they even need to be there at all, that's correct.
Well, hey, this is our last webinar of the year, and we really appreciate you being here today. I suspect that there are some of you who have attended some or all of our other webinars, which is also greatly appreciated. Any ideas that you have for us, you can simply send an email or give us a phone call. We're okay with talking on the phone too. And let us know. Give us your ideas about what you would like to hear about and what you'd like to see for 2019, because now is the time that we begin planning for the next year with regard to webinars and many other things. So send us your ideas, and we hope that you have a very merry holiday season and the happiest of New Year's.